Hey, I'm Coach T, and in this small video on Python, we're going to be practicing some of our fundamentals by building an email concatenator. So let me switch over here. So here is our big idea. This is going to govern what it is that we're building, but we want to build an email concatenator. So what that means is we're taking parts of strings and we are attaching them together to get an email. This is one of those little projects that I thought might be fun for a beginner to start to see how the real elemental tools of Python or of any coding language can be used to produce something new and useful. So let's just assume we've been tasked, hold on. Let's assume that we've been tasked by our IT department with developing a function to put student information in and then spit out an email. And there are a couple different bells and whistles that we could add to this, and maybe I'll do a part 2 to make it a little bit more advanced. But what we're going to do is we're going to first just do a procedural programming solution here, then we'll tie it together into a function that we can call by passing arguments into it. The goal here is to keep this at 8 minutes or less, so we need to go quickly. So let's first of all think, what do we need based on the must? Well, we need to take the first letter of the first name, so I'm going to need a first name variable, and we need a last name variable. And then I need something like an @site.com. I picked something very generic, but I'm going to call it the domain because I don't know what else to call it that's better. So these are the 3 things that I need to take in from the user, maybe, and then I'm going to need to do something with them. So how do I take something in from the user? Just pause and think about, in Python, how can you take in input from the user? If you thought to yourself, the input function, you're correct. So we're going to do an input like this. We're going to come back to domain in just a second, right? And next step, I need to prompt the user to type in a particular thing that will be stored into this first name variable. How would I phrase that to them? Probably something like just first name, right? Make sure you do the space there, otherwise it's going to look weird when they type. And we'll do the same thing here, last name. This is one feature that I really like in Python that C# doesn't have, is within the input command line, I can just type in a particular thing to be printed for them. So in C# it's more complicated. And you know, I probably should do something like a build email like this, right? So that way the user knows exactly what they're about to get into. And then we need to pause and talk about the domain. Is this something that the user should be inputting? Or is it something that should just be hard-coded? Well, that is, I guess, up to you as the project writer. But given that we're working for site.com right now, they're probably going to want site.com. So we'll do site.com. Oops, I apparently started running it on my own. My bad. Okay, so now we have the key structure here. We are inputting the first name, we are inputting the last name, and we have the domain, but we don't have this thing working as an output yet. We have input but no output. So how do we do that? Well, okay, 2 different ways. Let's assume that we want to save this as a variable. We're going to call that variable new email, right? So whatever goes into new email, we can then call to print out, which would be the other method. We could just print out what this email should look like, but I don't like that because it's harder for me to store it in a bigger program. I want this as a variable. So let's see. I need to do first name plus last name plus domain, and that should, why is this not, oh, last name, case sensitive, right? And also I need to put an ampersand. No, what is that? That's the @ sign. I need to put an @ sign there. So now what should I get? If I run our program, which I shall do, we're going to call this new email, Python debugger, Python file. Okay. All right, so build email. First name, we're going to do coach. Last name, we're going to do T. And okay, great. It didn't spit anything out. Why didn't it spit anything out? Well, I'm not outputting anything yet, right? So far, all I'm doing is I'm storing these into a variable. So let's add a print command. We'll do new email. Run it again. Coach T. Now I got Coach T at site.com. So that's more or less what I wanted, but you might notice that the requirements say to take the first letter of the first name and the full last name. Well, what I put in was Coach, so I put in Coach, and I only put in T here. If this was really working along with the musts of this project, then it should have been CT at site.com, right? Just the first letter of the first name. So we need to pause and think about how can we do that. And that's not something that I've actually addressed in the channel yet, is doing some substring work, mostly because I forgot about it, if I'm being honest. So let's pause and just talk about what is a string. Well, a string is a reference type that is storing references to somewhere else. And what that means is that we can actually treat it like it's a list or a dictionary or a tuple or a data collection, which is really neat. It's very handy. And that's true in C# as well. So this is something that I do have some experience with on both ends, Python and C#. But what we need to think about is how can we access just the first item in the collection represented by first name? That's tricky. If you've watched my list video, you might know about indexing, and that is actually the solution that we want. So an index is something like, I'm going to do this as a comment. Indexing is zero-based, meaning the first item or element in a collection has the number 0. Right? So if I want to access just the first item or element in a list, I need to request item 0. And we access indexed items by using the square brackets. So if I'm looking for the first item, it's going to look like this, right? Let's do that. We want to pull the first item or element, the first individual character out of the first name collection, list, string, whatever you want to call that. And so I'm going to request with the square brackets item 0. Then I'm going to add just the first item from first name to last name, and I'm going to in turn add that to domain. So now let's go to print new email, and I'll use a different name. We'll see what it spits out. Okay, first name, Pontiff Sullivan, and now I get psullivan at site.com, and I have satisfied the needs for this particular task, right? The goal or the idea here is to get the first letter of that first name. I use the 0 indexing to slice out that one part of the string, just that one, and then I concatenate that to last name, and I concatenate last name to domain. The very last step is just to turn this into a function. Python, very easy. We just say define email factory like this, space everything in there and provide a colon, get rid of that. And now I can call email factory, and if I run and debug this, it'll work down there. That's not necessarily the best way to do it though. Maybe I want to pass this in. I could also pull these out, provide them elsewhere, procedural programming style. And in Python, white space matters, so this needs to be correctly aligned. And I could say here, we're going to pass in first name, last name, like that. Make sure it's capital, right? And then now what's happening is as I run this code top to bottom procedural style, I am saving first name into this variable and passing it right here. Then I'm taking last name and I'm passing it right here so that they can be accessed by the new email. And then I can tell this print new email. And notice this just turned a lighter blue because now it's actually being used. So I could say print build email, first name, last name, and what we're going to do is we will say email factory, first name, last name, What did I spell wrong? New email equals email factory. Oh boy, I realize what I did wrong now. I was programming with a C# mentality. There it is. I just got to put it on the top. That's the downside to flipping between languages periodically. So, okay, a little bit of a brain mess there. So, okay, so I've defined my function up top, right? And I also just added return new email because I'm going to save this email in. So I could call this anything, right? I could call this student email. It doesn't matter, whatever. I'm ultimately going to get this email back when I call this. And we can see that by saying print student email. That way we can see that it's actually working. Build email, first name, we'll do Udex Gundeer, if you know, you know. And I got igundeer@site.com. So now I have that email saved. So that's how we can build an email concatenator. I realized I went a little bit long there. But we're going to do a couple more of these micro projects over the next week and hopefully get you really comfortable and confident with building neat things like this using just the elemental tools. So that's it. I'm Coach T. If you like this, subscribe. Otherwise, thanks for listening along, and I will see you in the next one.